sift through Nebraska's draft history in the last 5 years?
Nebraska's probably producing a few more draft quality players than NFL teams are recognizing. I think that's one thing.
Do you think that's a component of winning? They're not winning enough so you don't get noticed?
I think it's a component of winning. I think it's a component of constantly switching systems. I think it's a component of, I don't know how much of a NFL style offense Scott Frost was running. And I think that the defense that Nebraska is running right now is not what I would necessarily call like specifically NFL style. There may be some of that. Some of it is guys don't get invited to the combine. Some of it's not great 40 time. Some of it's the fact that, recruiting. Nebraska's recruited some 4-star kids who didn't pan out and left. They didn't develop those guys. And some of the guys that have panned out are either walk-ons or, low 3 stars that, if you look at the draft guides, and I always look at the athletic, and it's really, really good. They go through the whole thing. They go all the way back to their high school days, and they give you the dossier on their history and all those things. Like, a lot of times NFL teams are defaulting to some teaching points or some evaluation points that might be surprising to people. They're looking for traits, sometimes more than production. And so, but Nebraska has done better in terms of, yes, you're right. All these guys are on active rosters. All these guys are good players. I'd be surprised if Nebraska gets the draft pick this weekend, but you never know. I mean, maybe 1, maybe 2, late round. After the spring game, during the spring game, we'll see what happens.
Speaking of the defensive side of it, you think about this program getting to where it wants to be in year 2 under Tony White. You've got some guys there on the defensive line that project. You've got young players that project. Sam, if this defense moves forward and is able to sustain what we already saw from a year ago, and then we get into the NFL draft conversation, you mentioned the system. Which position group do you think could ultimately benefit from this system when it does come to your NFL draft stock?
I think the defensive line could benefit, and I think next year you'll see the defensive line produce at least 1, perhaps 2 NFL draft picks. I think because you have an opportunity to kind of play up and down the line a little bit. Nash Maker obviously has just primarily been a nose, but everybody can kind of do a little bit of everything. So you're getting an audition, a debut at a bunch of different positions, and I think that's probably helpful. The system that Nebraska wants to run as it affects linebackers, certainly. If you get guys that can really rush the passer off the edge, all the better. All the better, so it'll produce a good jack linebacker. But those interior guys can, in theory, be a little bit smaller. They can be, they can roam a little bit. So we'll see how that pans out. And of course, your corners are corners. If you have great corners, you have great corners. People can look at the corner draft board and they're going to see guys from Toledo and other schools. Like, you don't always know going into college who's going to produce a great corner. And like a lot of times it's about traits that are then developed. Bly Hill may have those traits. I mean, he went to St. Francis, PA, and good chance he's going to be a starter this year. And he's 6'3" and 185. Not many corners that size. That's an asset. Hard to throw deep on a guy that's 6'3". Really hard. You can get him in short areas a little bit, especially if they're playing off the ball. Maybe you can shake a 6'3" corner. Hard to throw over that guy. Hard to get deep balls on that height. So, I think Nebraska will do better in subsequent years in the NFL draft. I think this year it could be just 1 or 2, or maybe not.
Hey, isn't it wild that in a short amount of time, you brought up Bly Hill's height, that they're going to shift to, man, we might see a run of cornerbacks at Nebraska or even safeties that are 6'2", 6'3", or taller. That flipped pretty quick.
It did. And, again, there's lots of great qualities about having guys across the line that are like that. Alabama is able to do that. two other defenses too. There's incredible advantages if you have the right talent at all those positions. And, you know, it relates to not really playing radius, but it's hard to throw over it. You know, if a guy's a step behind his stride and his bail, you know, if he's got good technique, you know, his arms are getting in the way of deep passes a little bit more often. It's not foolproof. I mean, Tyreek Hill can run it past anybody, but yeah, that's helpful for sure. I think Mario Buford's going to be in the mix for 3 or 4 years. He's 6 foot, 5'11". So, you know, great corners are also that height too. The safety spot, you know, you're going to have some taller guys eventually. I think Marquise Buford and Malcolm Hartzog are going to play as well. You can kind of do that a couple of different ways. Like there's actually some, in theory, advantage to being a little bit smaller corner against the big receiver if you're physical. You can get inside their, you know, and inside their pads and you know, be real physical at the line of scrimmage. And then you're often a little tougher in those short areas because you're able to burst faster. But I mean, who doesn't like a 6'2" corner? That's just an incredible advantage if you're able to get that guy to break on ball, you know, short passes, and he can come inside. Lamar Jackson got there, I think, for Nebraska late in his career. Prince Amukamara was 6'2", 6'1", and almost impossible to go against his senior year. He just really couldn't. You really couldn't do much, and he was really physical too. And so I'm sure that's what they're hoping from Bly Hill.
Hey, a good conversation that you were having, and during Matt Rule's media availability over the weekend, and it got into the third down element, especially with defense. There was something that you brought up in your write-up just recently that I wanted to get your overall takeaway, and that is not just third down conversion rate, but opponents throwing 70 third down passes a year ago and completing basically 59% of them, and then 23 of those being converted into first downs, compared to Michigan that was allowing 17.6%. Michigan aside, what did that tell you about Nebraska's defense this year and the personnel they have this year? Last year, I should say, the defense last year, and the personnel they have this year to try to correct that?
I think they're trying to improve their 4-man pass rush. And, you know, so what does that look like on the interior? Who comes in on third down? Let's say in theory, you've got it siloed so that when you get to 3rd and 8, and I didn't get into this with Rule, and maybe he wouldn't have said this, but, you know, usually when you're in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, they're going to have to make personnel switches. So in theory, you can get the guys you want on the field for 3rd and 9 because the offense is doing so. What is that 4-man personnel? I could guess at it. You know, maybe it's Jamari Butler, James Williams, who I think is probably pretty good. Elijah Judy is a good interior pass rusher, and then maybe you got a 4th guy. What are those guys on third down? They have a pass rush package. They used that at times last season. I think that'd be probably something to watch a little bit. So better 4-man pass rush. And then when you're in, you know, 3rd and short and medium, can your corners, quite frankly, lock guys up in man coverage? Not just your corners either, not just your outside corners, but your slot corners too. A lot of times it's very hard on 3rd and 4 for your outside receivers to make hay. Unless it's Marvin Harrison, you know, and you're clearing him out and he's coming inside, he's got a big frame and all that. A lot of times you're working with your tight end and you're working with that inside guy, your slot receiver. On occasion, you're running those rub routes where the outside guys come through. Ohio State, again, does a lot of that because they have great receivers. So is your slot corner and is your coverage linebacker, are both those guys able to make plays and body up the slot receivers and the tight ends? That, you know, those are all things that they've got to work on and get better at. I thought they were pretty good at some of those things last year, to be clear. But on 3rd and long, they did struggle. And there were things as the season went on that teams were able to figure out a little bit against Nebraska. You know, maybe you have a tight end leak on 2nd and long or 3rd and long, and they struggled to cover that guy. And quite frankly, they struggled to cover that guy for 5 years. And so on a wheel route or a leak route or any of those things, they started to figure those things out a little bit. And then they started to figure out option routes against slot corners. You know, in the Wisconsin game, Buford was the guy that was down and covering, and he was just coming back from an injury. And, you know, that's just not an easy cover. It's just a hard cover when you're in space and things like that. So all those things are true. If you go back and look at the Great Bow defenses, they had what was called a match zone, kind of a matchup zone. And it was, it was sort of a zone behind. When you went deep, it was a zone, but underneath it was all man. And they would switch all the coverages like they were going into a zone, and they pick it up man. And he had all the guys. He had Gomes, and he had Haig, and he had Will Compton, and he had great players who were able to kind of patrol everybody. Yeah. And then he had the best pass rush in the country with Sue and Pierre Allen and Jared Crick. So if you ever want to go back and see how is this actually done, that's how it's done. That group will show you how it's supposed to work. But of course, you had a Pro Football Hall of Famer, and then you had multiple Pro Bowlers. I think Prince was a Pro Bowler, but you had multiple NFL players in that defense, and that's hard to replicate if you don't have players.
And what do your ears and eyes tell you this spring on what the offensive line has done to take that next step?
Well, there's two things. I think one, their life's going to be easier because they got a quarterback that's going to stay in a box, and they have more to expect. They can expect more from a quarterback. You cannot underrate the when your back's turned to the guy that you're protecting and you don't know what he's doing, it can be hard. A sack can look like it's on you when really the guy shouldn't have bailed the pocket, and he did. And so I think one of the advantages they're going to have is they know Dylan Raiola, who's probably going to be your starter, is going to stay in there. That's what Dylan Raiola wants to do. And if Raiola gets out, he's going to get out in a predictable way. He's going to be flush from the middle, and he's going to move outward. It's not going to be a guy just running outside to run outside. Chuba Purdy, for example, did that quite a bit in that Iowa game, where he's just kind of running, and you're not really sure where he's going because he didn't need to leave the pocket he was in. The second thing that I think you're going to see is, it's an older group, and I think it's probably going to be a group that can pick up a lot of the junk and traffic that you're going to see from defenses. I don't know that it's going to be a bulldozer group that's just going to blow everybody off the ball. But I do think it's going to be more athletic, and I think you'll be able to run some screen stuff. Get guys out on a screen and run a little bit, and maybe wall some guys off. And I love a good screen. Best thing about the Bill Callahan era. I love a good screen because you can take the edge off that pass rush. Mm-hmm. And one or two of those a game, and it's almost like you're making everything else better. And I think they'll get a little bit better at that play.
I know running back is always going to be a conversation. And just last Saturday, I don't know how surprised you were. Maybe none of us should be, that in a year where they were able to pick up Dante Dowdell, and rightfully so, a lot of people were excited about that. We're still talking about Emmett Johnson going into the final week of spring. What does that tell you about Emmett Johnson? But maybe more importantly, what does it tell you about the running back room?
I think they like the versatility of Emmett Johnson. I think they like what he's able to do, play to play. At the same time, they want to be able to roll more than one guy out there. I think their hope is that they've got options to 3-down options beyond Emmett. And Rule kind of got into it a little bit, where he's like, in our protection system, you have to do this and you have to do this. I think what he's saying there is, we need backs that are, again, I use this phrase a lot with the Fred Hoiberg. You need a back that's maybe at least 200 level off, and like, if you're going to play for Fred Hoiberg, you can't be a 100 level player, mm-hmm. because he's just too smart, and the offense they run is, while, intuitive, it requires some knowledge of the game, and so you have to learn it. I think it's the same with Nebraska's offense, or what they want to do. I don't think you could just roll out there and, hey, I'm going to run or I'm going to not run. Like, mm-hmm. There's some complexity to it. And I think